Chevre, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmis und beruchnis. Today is Erev Kodesh, Parshas Shelach, and as usual, as we said many times, the Alter Rebbe taught us that we have to live with the Parsha of the week, and we have to listen to its messages and its lessons. So first we'll start with a pasuk, which is part of our praying, which comes from this week's Parsha, and we're going to focus on that pasuk, which is part of our prayers every single day. But first we'll give tzedakah as the war started. Right now we're living in monumental epic times with the war with Iran, and the Yisrael should be the Dan Natzach, and this should bring Mashiach. So we gave tzedakah, Mashiach now, the Dan Natzach. Now we're going to say the pasuk from davening, which is from this week's Parsha, and that's the pasuk which is part of Parshas Shema, V'hoyo lechem letzitzis, and these tassels that you have at the corners of the garment should be tzitzis for you. And you shall see it. Uschartem is called mitzvahs, Hashem, and you should remember all the mitzvahs. And do them, and not explore after your heart and after your eyes, which you stray after them. So, last year, I also spoke on this pasuk, and see there if you wish, Shelach 5784, and we spoke about more direct the connection between the beginning of the Parsha, the spies, and the sin of the spies, and this mitzvah of tzitzis, and how tzitzis is an antidote to the sin of the spies. See Rashi over here straight away. Since I spoke about that last year, this year we'll speak more about the commandment itself. This verse that we said just now, which is part of davening every day, is one of the 613 commandments, which is part of where the mitzvah of tzitzis was given to us. So tzitzis is directly related to remind us, as a precaution, through tzitzis we can remember all the other mitzvahs. And we spoke about that also before. But included in the mitzvah tzitzis is a reminder of now that particular mitzvah, as the Chinuch writes very famously, it's one of the 6 mitzvahs tmidios. There are 6 mitzvahs out of all the 613 that are constant, which means they apply at all times and all places as an obligation to fulfill 24/7. So we see how essential this is as a foundation, as a Yesod Godel, as a great foundation in Avodas Hashem. In particular, it's talking about the eyes and the heart. So before we continue to get more detail, I just want to say again, as usual, how we find the message of the Torah, which is so relevant. And as time goes on, we see even more how relevant it is. That's one of the amazing things about the Torah, that the Torah is 3,300 plus years that was given to us, this code. And nevertheless, we see how first now, the message and the commandments and the lessons that are associated with the Torah are more relevant than ever. For example, let's talk about which means to have thoughts and connected to Avodah Zarah. I'll soon read you the Gemara. And we mentioned this Gemara before, but not as, I'm going to go rewind a bit before that. But in any case, over here is the commandment of what type of thoughts you're allowed to have. How is a Jew meant to think? And how there's legislation concerning your intellectual content that you're going to put into your brain. So that's and the same thing, you have to guard your eyes. So both of these things, in the last 200 years, and especially in the last 50, 60, 70 years, and in the last 20 years, concerning we have the Enlightened movement. They were called the Maskilim. And this is different sort of, we'll call it, I don't know what it's called in the English, the Enlightenment movement, which wanted to introduce more of secular studies and secular ideas into mankind. And there were a lot of Jews that were involved in this, and it caused many, many people to stray and go off the right path. But you could connect it also to communism, different ideologies. So let's talk about that for a second. We see what's going on right now in the last 2 years about Harvard and Yale and Columbia, how all of the secular studies, what did it amount to in the end? Anti-Semitism. And with logic, you could always make it twisted and warped and perverted to find an excuse and rationalize almost anything. So that's concerning deis, which means opinions, perspectives. And again, we could say that television, what you look at, the impact that it has on the person, because it reaches the deepest, deepest levels of your souls. So the damage that's done from your eyes is almost worse than everything else. The eye sees, and that stirs you to have certain lust, etc. And that's why the message of is stronger now more than ever before. There's television and the age of television. Then came the internet. And we have the devices, which is the age of distraction. It's all about distractions. And the damage. We have many organizations now, firm organizations. I think first it was Guard Your Eyes. Then they have an organization called Vayimoyin. These are amazing organizations that try to help a person to stay away from certain negative addictions that bring the person down and cause destruction and rip apart families. And the whole person feels lower and lower in his own eyes because of this problem of how he becomes addicted through his eyes to negative things. So therefore, this commandment is more relevant now than ever before. So let's talk about it a bit, just to give us a greater appreciation. There's a Gemara in Parshas, Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis, which says, Parshas tzitzis dema kavu'ah. Why was the portion of tzitzis put together with the portion of Shema? So stop for a second. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad is the most important pasuk, let's say, in Judaism, which talks about the most important precept, the oneness of Hashem, which was in the lips of every Jew that sacrificed himself for Hashem. Together with that portion of Shema, we have the Parsha of Tzitzis, which has the mitzvah of besides for Tzitzis. So again, let's go back to the Rambam. Where does the Rambam put the Issa, the prohibition of in Hilchas Avodah Zarah? Because when you let your mind wander, you become too curious. Don't even entertain the thoughts of heresy, etc. And now we see a direct connection between Parshas Shema and Parshas Tzitzis, because if a person is not careful in the V'leis Asuru, he'll come to transgress the Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, as the Rambam writes. Back to the Gemara. Why was this put into Parshas Shema? Rabbi Yehuda bar Chaviva said, in Parsha of Tzitzis there are 5 things. Mitzvah Tzitzis, Yitzias Mitzrayim, the mitzvah of Tzitzis, the going out of Egypt. Oil mitzvahs, the acceptance of all the mitzvahs, because it says if you see tzitzis, you will come to all the other mitzvahs. And then it says, das minim, the perspective of heretics. And then, hirur aveda, hirur avodah zarah. The thoughts of sin and thoughts of avodah zarah, idolatry. And that is included in The Gemara continues, this Gemara we mentioned last year, that Achil Levavchem Zuminus. Achil Levavchem is thoughts of heresy. Achil Nechem goes on here Avera. Thoughts that are about immodesty and carnal things, etc., as the Alter Rebbe discusses in chapter 11 of Tanya. And Asher Atem Zoynim Achreim is here Avodah Zarah. Here Avodah Zarah is actual thoughts of Avodah Zarah, learning about different Avodah Zarah and things like that. And Minus is just, doesn't mean necessarily you serve another idol. It's just a heretic. You don't believe in a God in general. And things like that. So here we see how important this parsha is that we say every single day. Okay? How it contains all the fundamentals. So now, let's talk about a person. We're living in this age of the internet. And we're living in this age of these books and so you can go to the library. So what we have to talk about is a couple of things. Time is limited. So number one, today one of a very important issue is mental health. And we spoke about it many times. Chabad is Chochma Bina Das. And Torah is Chochmosai Shel HaKodeš Baruch Hu. If you want to be mentally healthy, learn the Torah and learn Chassidus Chabad, which addresses mental health. Because the truth is, as usual, everything starts from the mind. That is the Vart. And this goes together with the Maimon Hazal. So again, the Lav over here, teaches us, let's repeat this, that contemplation of sin is also a sin. In contemplation of sin itself, there's different levels. There's the knowledge of, let's say, Avodah Zarah. You're now going to study comparative religion. You're now going to put some information in your brain. And the same thing goes for philosophy. You have to speak to your local rabbi. You're not allowed to put that information and those sort of thoughts in your mind space, in your brain space. But there's also contemplating doing a sin in general, or contemplating certain things that are impure and illicit, which do damage for you. And included in this is the Maimon Hazal, which says, Hiruri Avera, Kosher Me Avera. The thought of sin is worse than sin itself. Again, we're not talking about the halachic issue over here, but what does it mean? Why can we say even such a concept that Hiruri Avera, the thought of sin, could be even more harsh than the sin itself? So over here, as usual, Chabad Chassidus speaks about the idea that machshava is called the levush hameyuchid, the levush hapnimi. Your consciousness is a deeper part of yourself. The real you is your machshava in relation to dibur. Dibur is how you want to appear to the public. But your machshava is how you think in relation to yourself. People don't hear your thoughts. So it's the levush hapnimi, it's the inner garment. And it's the levush hamiyuchad. It's united with you constantly, and therefore we say that machshava mishetetes tamid. I said this many times. When your wife asks you, "So what are you thinking about?" When you say nothing, that's not true. Your thoughts are always working. You could say, "I'm not thinking about anything important," but you're thinking, because your consciousness is always on. And the reason why your consciousness is always on is because, just like your nefesh, you're always alive, as long as you're alive. As long as you're alive, your mind is working. And that shows how your machshava is miyuchad with the nefesh. Just like the nefesh always is on, machshava is always on. So now Chassidus comes along and says that a damage to your mind is totally incomparable to a damage that's to your thought or to your speech. The time you can speak and the time you can be quiet. And surely action. So in other words, you could do something wrong, and that's it. You can walk away from it. The damage to yourself is not necessarily so lasting. And the same thing with speech. Of course, once you speak and the words are let out from you, it can cause irreparable damage, as we speak in the concept, as is known in the concept of Lashon Hara, etc. But in relation to the person, the stain that you make through speaking things that are not proper, is nothing compared to the stain, to the blemish that you're affecting yourself when your mind becomes corrupted, when your machshava becomes stained, and it continues. And it's always there. Imagine you have a cassette tape where you put a recording on it. The question is if you want to bring it to the forefront or not, but it's always there. So the damage done to the consciousness by thoughts that are negative, the toxicity is eternal. And it's something that to work on, to get rid of, it'll be much, much more difficult. That's in machshava. So therefore we say, Hiruri Aveda, Kosher Aveda. And that's what it means, Don't even bring it up into your mind. Be very careful about that. And that's why Torah is very careful about that. Because everything starts with the mind. Now, another very important point over here is the idea of boundaries. It's a very big subject these days, boundaries and borders. And again, we're talking about, devices, as we mentioned before. So this is where, here we have the Torah putting up this commandment, which is the beginning, the main important boundary and borders that a person has to have. If he's not going to have any borders or boundaries, then he becomes out of control, as we see today. Now, this is also connected with another concept. I know we're speaking about a couple of things, but it's all connected to this mitzvah. And that is the famous Maimon Azal, which you also spoke about. There's a Maimon Azal that says, Hayoim it says you have to be careful for the evil inclination, because today it tells you do this, and then the other time it'll tell you to do that, until it tells you to serve idolatry. Which means the whole point of this Maimon Azal is to tell us that be careful. Because once you start and you transgress the that's just the beginning, and then afterwards it becomes worse and worse. And why? And this is the way Chassidus explains that the truth is, in a certain sense, that's the whole point. The real intention of the Yetzer Hara, where they aims to put in the Nefesh Habahamis, is to bring the person down, down, down all the way, to do the worst thing. And again, therefore, we see why V'leis Suru is together with Shema. And why the Rambam put into Hilchos Avodah Zarah? Exactly because of this Maimon Azal. Hayoim oimel yasei kach, it says, take a peek, think about this, what's the big deal? Is it so bad? Guess what? That's exactly the plan of the Yetzer Hara, is to start with this. Hayoim oimel yasei kach, mocher oimel yasei kach. First he starts do this, then he says do that, then he does another thing, and you're just going down, the beginning of the descent. But the plan of the Yetzer Hara is to keep on bringing you down and down, further and further. So therefore, to prevent all this in the first place, put up the boundary and the borders. Now, again, we spoke about this also other times. Today we're speaking mainly about the mind. It's another whole discussion about the eyes. Last year I spoke about the eyes. But I want to speak about the mind because the truth is Chabad is very much into the mind. And that's also what the Alter Rebbe writes in Periches of Tanya about Chochmas Chitzoni, secular studies. And why he says secular studies is worse than Dvarim B'Teilim. And as usual, it's counterintuitive in a positive way. Because if you'll ask a regular person without Chassidus, and you'll say, so what's worth? Dvarim B'Teilim? Just reading a joke book? Or studying, I don't know what, the writings of Dickens and Shakespeare and Darwin? That's serious subjects in university. And the Alter Rebbe comes along and he says, no, that when a person is talking Dvarim B'Teilim, anything which is something which even a simpleton, truck driver, construction worker of a moderate intellect can understand. That means you're just really contaminating your emotions. As long as you contaminate only your emotions, the intellect can still rescue the emotions. Because moich shalat ala lev, also as the Alter Rebbe writes, the brain dominates the heart. So even if your emotions are stirred in a negative way, we have the mind which is higher than the emotions, and the mind can still rescue the emotions. But if the mind is contaminated, as we see today, as we mentioned before, these institutions of higher learning, if the mind is contaminated, who's going to rescue the mind? The mind is the deepest part that's in you. And it's more powerful than the heart. Moich shalat ala lev. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe says that if you contaminated your emotions, it's not as bad. Dvarim b'telim, just talking about petty trivialities, ridiculous things. Who won the World Series, or who won the, I don't know what, the NBA, or what do you like better, this type of shirt or that type of shirt? I don't know what kind of shtussim you could be talking about. So you're just contaminating your emotions, because anybody can discuss these things. But if you contaminate your Chabad, which is much deeper, then, and everything starts with the mind, so it's a much, much bigger problem. So therefore, when it comes to secular studies, you have to be much more careful to know whether you should study these subjects, because who knows what it could lead to. And again, I'm not the Rav, I'm not a rabbi over here, I'm just telling you what the Alter Rebbe says in the end of chapter 8. And all these things have to be addressed to a halachic authority. If you have the right foundation, and you're coming from, and you got the right chinuch in your life, then you can be exposed to certain things more than other people. For example, and I think I mentioned this once before, the irony of ironies was that the Sanhedrin had to be baki in Hilchas Avodah Zarah. This rule that we said before, that you're not allowed to study any Avodah Zarah, that's for everyone except for the Sanhedrin. But the Sanhedrin had to be baki in Avodah Zarah, even though you'd think it's Sholish Klippus Atmeis. They're allowed to, because they're going to destroy Avodah Zarah through knowing what Avodah Zarah is, i.e., especially if someone's going to be coming in front of Bezdin, and there's going to be a question, did he serve the Avodah Zarah or not? So the Bezdin have to know exactly what is Avodah Zarah. But that's an exception to the rule. Only Sanhedrin were meant to be baki in those things, but the average person, chas v'sholem, you have to stay away from this. So this is all included in the V'leisa Suru, Achei levavchem v'achei nechem, asher atem zoynem acharei. So there's a story. Probably I said this story before also in my life. There's a story of the Frierdiker Rebbe that when he was a kid, he used to stare out the window. And he had a malamed, I think it was the Rashbatz. And the Frierdiker Rebbe writes about himself when he said over the story that he had a habit. He used to stare out the window of Cheder. So the Rashbatz told him, besser sein in draußen, gucken in a wenig, wie sein in a wenig, and gucken in draußen. He said it's better to be on the outside, looking inside, than being inside and looking outside. When the Frierdiker Rebbe said this verse, he said, you can imagine already what I saw on the outside. When he was in Cheder and he's looking out the window, what do you think he saw already? He saw chickens and goats. When the Frierdiker Rebbe said the story, he said, but today it's a whole different thing. Chas v'sholom, when someone's looking outside. Looking outside when we have, devices, who knows? The Rebbe repeated this story. But this is an amoyed dikamaisa. Besser sein in draußen, gucken in a wenig. A person who's outside, as of yet, but a cooked in a wenig, he has a positive perspective about Torah. He has a positive perspective about mitzvahs. He has a positive perspective about another Jew. So then one day, because his mind is in the right place, his heart will follow, and he will follow. One day he will find himself inside. Mashain came, contrast the person was in the but the one who was inside and is looking outside, he's really outside. He's not inside. Because his mind's not there, his interest is not there, his desire is not there. So one day, Rachmana litzlan, he'll place himself outside. So the Eibishter should help. We should all be Mekayim, the mitzvah of V'leisa Suru Achel V'avchem V'achle Nechem, and realize the importance of it and improve in that area. And that will be connected to Yitzias Mitzrayim. We have to work on our own Yitzias Mitzrayim. The whole situation right now with Iran, there's no question about it, that Hashem will protect us. In every single generation, there's a Ayatollah, there's a Hitler, and a Stalin, and a Haman, and a Nebuchadnezzar, etc., etc. And every single time, והקודש ברוך הוא מצילנו מידם. But the question is, what's going on with my inner struggle? If I'm not on the front fighting the war, if I'm not a pilot flying over Iran, I have to now exercise my koyach hanitzachim, the dan notzach. Next time when there's going to be a struggle about an area of V'leisa Suru Achel V'avchem V'achle Nechem, and I will do my bit in exercising that mitzvah properly. There's no question about it that when each and every one of us in his world, in his empire, will exercise that V'leisa Suru Achel V'avchem V'achle Nechem, this will cause the ultimate Didan Notzach of Gula Mitzvah Shlema, take it from Yad Mamish. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, your man in Melbourne.